Hey everyone, this should be the final video in this series, and I'm looking forward to showing you what I have in store here. Now, this video will have a couple parts. First is just a review really quickly of everything. I don't plan on being super in detail because you can always go back and watch everything we did with more detail, but I just want to catch people up, maybe people who it's been a while since I put up the last video, or you're just coming here for the first time. Just give you the quick overview of everything. The second part, I'm just going to show you a couple little changes I've made since the last video, number 6. And lastly, I'm going to show you a quick walkthrough of a front-end integration with this service, specifically built in Flutter. Let's get into it. So just a quick review. So this is the Django side of the project. And if you recall, we have a Docker Compose file we made that essentially is running our containers. And we have basically inside our containers, we have one for our database, one for our Redis for cache and sessions and stuff like that. And then one for our broker, which in this tutorial we haven't actually been making use of, but maybe in a future one. Broker is used so that we can do async events, essentially using something like Celery to run a long running task in the background, and it's a nice pattern and it's great. We didn't get to it in this one. It's really good for things like, sending an email or something like that in the background when someone signs up. Basically things you don't want to, get in the way of sending back an API request. So we have that. And essentially we kind of broke our project up into a few different apps. So we have the common app that has just some of our common things in it, like our abstract model, and there's not too much going on in here, just some basic stuff. We have our content app, which is definitely our biggest app, and this is where we had our post model and our comment model right there. And we have our project, which is sort of has our root settings. We are using environment variables for this. So we created this env class here that actually loads our .env data from here locally. And then, of course, on your server, you would have this configured differently to a different database, all that kind of stuff. So that was ready in the first video. And, I went over it in detail there of how to do that. It's really nice. Works great. So we were able to load in different settings from there by just getting our secret key, whether we're in debug mode. We have some installed apps, all that kind of stuff. Then actually probably the app with the most code is actually our API app, which doesn't have any of its own models, but essentially it sets up our different endpoints. So we have endpoints for auth, anything to do with our posts, our comments, and now users. So inside post, for example, we have, first of all, the URLs that we have our base URLs right here, which I was just showing you, which point to these sort of like sub URLs. And within post, we have a whole bunch of URLs going to things like the list create view, me list create view, which allows you to get your drafts back as an example. We have endpoints to get and retrieve things, and also ones to make comments on that specific one. And if we just look at one of these views, we are breaking these up in a pretty nice way, region-based, where we have sort of like a base class post API view where we set all the defaults that any of our, post-based views would use generally. So what query set we're using, what serializer we're using, that kind of stuff. And then we actually extend them for our list create. So we don't have to, retype all this stuff again because that's kind of our defaults. But in something like here, actually, we don't do it anywhere in here, but here's an example. Like we're actually extending in our post me API view, which is another base class. We're extending this, and we have we're overriding the permission class. So you have to be authenticated in order to get this. Through our views, we have serializers as well. Using Django REST framework, really easy to make a serializer based on a model just by passing in the model, and then the fields you want to expose and which ones you want to make sure can't be changed through an API request. So things like ID and UUID we definitely don't want. And I have owner there twice for some reason. We'll fix that now. And we did something very similar for comments. We have the various URLs, and we have, a way to make a comment by, and this is where we sort of did, instead of a model-based serializer, we created our own custom serializer. That's just extending serializer.serializer, where we actually pass in some things, including the owner, which is actually just using the current user. So the end user doesn't send that up. That's happening with authentication through the token. And then we actually, in the post request, validate the serial, get that data, create the comment, and then actually return it with our normal comment serializer so that the front end can, do whatever it wants with it. So yeah, that's kind of it there. Auth, all we've done, although we don't have anything for registering an account, although that would be pretty trivial to do, we have stuff for tokens. So you're able to essentially create a token by passing in an email and password, and it tries to authenticate you and generates a token and sends it back, which then, a user would store, or the client would store in local storage or like some secure storage in order to make API requests. And then the server knows that, oh, it's this person every time. And that's really the whole point of the authentication. So yeah, that's kind of what we did. Just very quick review again. If you're interested in how this was all put together, definitely watch the videos. Much more in depth than what I can do in a quick video. Now I want to quickly show you just some things I made since the last one in case you have been following around. So I made, although we already had the serializer for user, because we wanted it in our other serializers to be able to expose this user public serializer, I've also made the user me serializer, which is basically the same except it exposes the email. And I am still making email a field that is read-only. And that's because to future-proof this, you probably don't want someone to be able to just change their email on a whim. Usually there's a more complex process involved where you actually have to request an email change, and then you'll get an email sent to that new email, and then you'll click a button to, basically prove that you're that person or that you would control that email. So I decided that just for future proofing, not that we're going to get there in this series, obviously, but I think it's a good pattern is don't just let someone change their email with a post request. Many reasons why, you wouldn't want to do that. But what we did add is we actually have some URLs here now. So we have a user list view, which is very basic. Basically, it's using this user API view, which we have an all users query set, which gets all of our users, but only ones that are active. So if, through the admin, you've deactivated someone, it, won't be there. And then, we just get them with the list view and retrieve, same kind of thing. We just retrieve it. Now we also have a user me API view, and we can just simply call that by going /me, as long as we're logged in. So you'll see that the user me API view requires authentication. So we're overriding, although we're extending this, we're overriding it saying you have to be authenticated, hit this one, because otherwise we don't know who you are. And we're using a different serializer. And then we're overriding the get object, which is what the retrieve mixin will use. And instead of doing instead of like querying through the Django ORM, we just want to use self.request.user as the user input that gets put in. And then, the user me, we have a user me retrieve update view. So we can put, and we can patch. I don't have anything for delete. It could be something we do in the future, but not for now. So that's what I've added. That's what's new. And I'll commit that code, before posting this up so you can see the changes. But I want to get to sort of the front-end integration part of this. Now, I'll be honest, I got a little bit carried away. I was planning on just making like a pretty simple, integration with Flutter specifically. But again, I could have used React. I could have used anything. There's nothing. This isn't a Flutter specific backend. This is a backend. It's a JSON API. Anything can integrate with it. For instance, we've already integrated with it, right? We've already integrated with Postman, of course, just a developer tool, but we can do all these things here. I can go and list users and all that sort of stuff. I can, retrieve. I can hit the me, and I'm showing these ones because these are the new ones that we haven't seen before. But and we can patch me all through Postman. So we've already kind of done a client-side integration, right? Obviously, this isn't something that you would just give to your users to be like, just interact with this. Although that could be fun too. So I did put together a implementation of this on the front end. And again, I was trying to kind of keep it simple and straightforward, but, I wanted to use some good patterns. And then I started to get really inspired and like, man, okay. Cause I've built lots of Flutter apps and I kind of just, I think, took a lot of, the different patterns I've been using over the days and really put it together, I think, in a concrete way. So, I am going to show you this. And if you are a Flutter developer, I think there's some interesting stuff in here, some really cool patterns. I definitely, won't have time to get into every little detail, but I will put the code up as well so you can take a look at it. And kind of what I'm building, through this series, I'm going to continue to build in a, either live streaming or just on my own, because it is, sort of like something I have been on and off working on for a long time, which is basically like a really nice framework that just gets you sort of like, halfway there with all the CRUD and everything like that. And I've released some videos about this before, and I've kind of never really like fully abandoned this project. I call it Houston, but I've kind of like, as I've been doing, I'm like, oh, I'm doing stuff better, a new way now, or a better way. Like, for instance, I'm using FP Dart now for like functional programming, and that doesn't exist in the older iteration. But I plan on, keeping to work on this. And I think what I'm onto now could be like something I'm actually finally going to be happy with, hopefully. And if you go back and watch my like Flutter skeleton project, you'll kind of see what I mean. Like, I have a lot of stuff for like code generation, scaffolding, using things like Mason and everything. And I plan on bringing that over once I'm like, 100% happy with this. And Houston always has, or at least for the many of the last years, been a Django on the back end, Flutter on the front end. For a while, I was fiddling with using Supabase on the back end, and it worked, and I got something kind of working. But I'm not. I still think I just prefer Django. I think having that sort of control and power and cost effectiveness of not having to really like pay for a backend as a service is really the way to go. So there'll be more on this in the future. But all that being said, I'm going to show you this app that I made, and we made together in some ways. So we'll start by let's clean this up a bit. I'll get the Flutter code open. I'm just going to do a green arrow rebuild just to make sure everything is tidy and nice. All right, so here we are. We have our login screen. I've pre-filled it with just the login details, just to save time all the time when I'm testing logging in and logging out. Keep in mind through this demo, this is super minimal in terms of UI, because, especially in trying to build something that you're eventually going to skin and make nice, you don't want to have it very opinionated at all, because it's easier to like add, design and color around something that's simple than tweak something that's already complex. So it's going to look ugly. But I assure you, this is, what I'm showing you here is 95% of the Flutter work to integrate. And that last 5% is, you get a Figma file and you're like, okay, now I'm going to make it pretty. I guarantee you that there's a lot going on here to do what I'm about to show you. So we can log in. And we have our list of posts. So that's our, our post endpoint. We can, of course, refresh this list, and everything's good. We can look at a post. We can see all the comments. Now there's no comments here, but I will add one. Hey, and we'll see, hey, got put in there and everything's great. What else can we do? We can create a new post. My new post. Hi. And I'm going to click publish on save so it shows up in the list. And there we go. My new post by me. Yay, it's there. What else can we do? We can edit an existing post. So I can actually change this, assuming I'm the owner of it. Then I can edit it. And we'll see it just updated. The title right there. Everything was great. We're getting little messages. It's cool. What else? We also have a tab here. So I have this broken into, using Go Router, different tabs. And that's actually why I had to make the user endpoint. And I think I was making a refactor right before this video and I realized I didn't test one thing. Let me fix it real quick. All right, quick little fix I made. And yeah, we have a list of users. There's only one user in our database. And we have a little profile page for that person. Obviously no images or anything. We never got to that. But maybe, future topic, future day. So yeah, that's basically it. That's what I have to show you. And, I think from a naive person's perspective, they might, be like, oh, that wasn't that much work. And yeah, I probably could have built this thing in 1 hour in really bad practices, doing it with just like stateful widgets, and just like, really unsafe data types, not dealing with any, functional programming, not having any like state providers. Like something that's really complicated here that seems simple is the fact that I can edit this, change it to like, put a bunch of 5s, save it, and, this automatically updates without me, worrying about it. All that stuff, those little like, cherry on the top sort of things of state management, is that's where like the real work comes, right? So I'm going to walk you through how this project works. And again, I will put this code up. I think it's pretty sweet. Some of my best code to date. All right. So our project, we have a main.dart. Okay. We have a storage provider as well. Now I am, for the purposes of this, using shared preferences. I don't actually recommend this project for if you're planning on a web, which in theory this will, and my plan would be on web to use something like Hive or Sembast or something like that. The reason is you don't want to store stuff. Shared preferences uses web local storage, which isn't like the most secure place to store something for cross browser or cross frame origin attack sort of stuff. Essentially, like another tab could get access to that data. But neither here nor there. For the purposes, it's totally fine, especially because this is a Mac app or, an iOS app in my mind right now. So we await for that just to initialize. There's a little bit of stuff to do. Then we just have a simple my app. Now I'm using RiverPod, so we have a consumer widget. We also have to wrap everything in provider scope, as you would know from any other RiverPod project I've done. Now something new. I've never done this before. I actually have made the router. If we actually go to the router provider, we're using Go Router, but it's actually being managed by a RiverPod provider, which allows us within here to watch things about state and also watch, basically watch changes in the router here to actually update what can come back, which is super helpful when you want to have like things like loading and login and have stuff that's kind of like behind authentication and all that sort of stuff. So we have our Go Router here. And the way I've sort of done this, when you get into the, there's the login screen, that's pretty basic, but then we're using a stateful shell route index stack. And that allows us to have different, what are called branches. And that is essentially, we can have a tab that state, this will keep its own state separate from this one. So when I go back, I'm still on this, I'm still on the screen, nothing changed there, which is nice. So that allows us to do that. And the way I sort of configure the routes on a feature by feature basis is I create something like called post.routes, and we actually configure everything. It's namespace, it's shell navigator key, because they each have their own key, and then it's actual paths in here. So it keeps the router really clean. And, the focus here is really compartmentalizing the different features, because you'll see we have everything broken down similar to how we do in Django. We have an auth feature, we have a comment feature, a post feature, and a user feature. And we've seen that before, right? If we go to Django and go to our URLs, if I pick the right ones, we have auth, post, comment, and user. So sort of following the same pattern as your backend is just a nice pattern for software development, right? So this allows us to sort of keep, everything about posts really compartmentalized to, post.routes.dart, and same with users, that kind of thing. So in here we have core. Core is some sort of like things that aren't really feature specific. So for instance, I have things like the app container, and this is actually the shell that kind of wraps around this, that has the tab bar. So posts and users, as well as, essentially just putting the body of it as the navigation shell, whatever one's currently, selected. So that's not really specific to a feature, so it kind of belongs here. There's also some helper classes like a centered error, centered loader. I just found myself a lot of the times putting a loader in a center and using it, but let's just make a component, centered loader component. You're also going to notice, and something probably new if you've watched some of my other videos, I've started to kind of do something that Angular does, where you, instead of calling it like load underscore more underscore button underscore component, I'm actually using this sort of like dot component dot dart. I just think it's clean and nice. And in theory, I could write, this is helpful for if I wanted to configure my code generators to only watch specific files. Having dot model or dot, provider and stuff like that is helpful. Although we're not doing that here, it's something that I wanted to do. I'm also always calling anything that's like a component, like a widget, like something that's going to show up on a screen that isn't a screen itself, is namespaced with the word component in it. Yeah, so just have some stuff like that. We also have some core models. So there's, for instance, pagination info. Because remember, we have in any of our list results come back with a count, a page, num pages, and limit. Like I can show, when I'm listing users, we're not just getting the users, we're also getting pagination info. So I've created a class basically that represents this, although I don't care about next and previous. So it really just represents this. And we'll see that there. And there's also like a model for errors, being able to, do stuff with, which you'll see very shortly. We also have some core providers, essentially that router provider that I showed you already. We have our storage provider, which I also showed. And we have this base list provider, which might look like nonsense right now, but it's going to be really cool when we get to it. Okay, then yeah, some services. So we have our API service. So this is not a Riverpod provider. This is just a class that we'll be able to use. And it has some stuff in it, like basically building our DO client based on the URL and setting its content type. It has stuff for getting, I can actually fix this here, getting the access token, go away, from local storage, and then actually adding it into the headers whenever there is one. And if, authenticate is true, which it is by default, but some endpoints we don't want to authenticate, like the login. We have some helpers for building like the limits and the page, just to, make it easy. I like to do this in one spot because if our API ever changed, or instead of calling it page, we want to call it P, we can, in theory, fix it in one spot and the rest of the app will work. And yeah, like I was saying, we're using FP Dart. So most times, especially with anything network related, we're never just returning, a map string dynamic. We're always returning something called either, which allows us to have two different things that could be returned. So anytime that we make a request, assuming it has a status code of 200 or 201, which right now are our success status codes, 200 being okay, 201 being okay created, we just return the data. Otherwise, we do left, which is going to be an API error, and we actually create that API error from JSON. Or if that fails, we just kind of construct our own based on the error string. So then we have our getters, and we got get, post, patch. In theory, we'd add put and delete here if we needed it, but we don't right now. And the way this kind of works is we grab that client, which is constructed right here with all these kinds of things, and we pass the authenticate variable through. And then we have this fixed path function. All this does is adds a trailing slash if there isn't one, because Django wants you to have that. Otherwise, you run into issues, especially on a post request. You run into major issues if you don't have that trailing slash. And we pass the query parameters through in DO as well, based on these params that come in. And then we run the handle result, which again, this returns this. So we're always returning this sort of either concept, which is really cool. So that's our base, API service. Utils, we have stuff for creating toasts. Cool. Just so that I don't have to repeat this code anywhere in the app. It's just I do toast service.error or toast service.message, and it will, do this thing for us. Look at the code if you want it more. Okay, so going back to our main.dart, just to kind of step through this, we have our router. Cool. And then based on the router, it's going to do various things. So let's just look at this router. And it's generated. So let's actually look at it here. So first of all, we need to check if auth state is ready. If it's not ready, and let's look at auth state. Again, open this. Auth state is a model. It's a generated model and freezed, and it has a ready function, which by default will be false because nothing, when you launch the app, we want that to be false. And the auth state is going to store your token, which is essentially a combination of the access token and refresh token, the same one we get when you do a create token right here. See, access and refresh. So we're storing that. And then we're also storing a reference to user me, which is essentially our user object, the private one, the one when we call the get me that has the email in it too. So we're storing that. Both can be null. And basically what we do is we first, when this boots up and is, lazy loaded, we check for some stuff in our storage to see if we have an auth access, an auth token and a refresh token. And if we do, now you see there's a to do here because I haven't actually checked, has it expired yet? That's on my to-do list. But if there is, we basically create that token using those values. We update the state with that token. Then we call get me, and get me basically uses our user service.retrieve me. retrieve me basically goes, and this is something extending our API service that I showed you momentarily ago. And you'll see we can go retrieve me. And we basically we call get, which get is just part of that API service, right? This guy right here that we looked at. And we get a result back, and the result could be an API error, or it could be map string dynamic, right? And we have to fold that. When it's left, it's an error, and we return left here. So we just kind of forward that thing right through this. If it's right, we actually are getting JSON back, or it's not really JSON, it's a map string, but we can't use the word map, so we say JSON. And we actually construct that user by passing in that JSON, and then we return the right version of this. But I am wrapping this in a try catch because just because we got data back and the server said it's okay, maybe it's like not the correct data, maybe it's missing something, and we don't want to just have an error happen. So we actually try this, and if not, we basically like throw an API error, return that back right in here. Yeah, so then we get me, and this basically just, assuming there's not an error, it will just return this user from here. And assuming it's not null, it will then update it by using copy with. I don't have this in a null check because technically we want it, we can still set it to be null. Freeze will allow us to do that. And in fact should, because our user's null. Let's just make sure it's null. And then after all that stuff happens, whether this doesn't or not, we set ready to true. And the reason we want ready to be true is because our router provider, if it's not ready, we're kind of on that loading screen, which is just this like route here that is just, a scaffold with a centered circular progress indicator. Otherwise, we check to sort of see if there is a initial path. And this is specifically what we want for web, because on web, we want to be able to like restore it from, if someone's at a deep link, we want to be able to get that. We also check if there's a token. And again, I probably would need in here some kind of to-do check if expired. And basically, if the token is null and the path isn't login, we want to redirect to the login screen. If the path is null, if the path is login, we want to go to the home route because we don't want someone living on that login screen if they already are logged in. Then we just reset that initial URL back to null and we return the path. And that's just how the redirect works. It's something that's going to, expect a string after an await. Then we have all of our routes. So the home route, and I've just set this here, we use the post routes namespace as the home route. So once you are logged in, we go to the post routes branch. And if we look at that, these are the screens. So there's the post list screen right at the root. So you'll see the path is just the namespace right here. But we also have an edit path and we also have a detail path here. And I'm using the word namespace here so that we only have to type string once. We don't want to have this repeated in our code. We always want to be doing this because again, I could decide these are actually called blogs now, and if I did that, the rest of the app would update because they're always referencing this. So let's take a look at the post list screen. Okay, so post list screen, similar to what we're doing with component, anything that's a screen and it basically screens will always return scaffolds. We call it a screen. And, in here, we have the post list screen and I'm doing the same kind of thing, dot screen, dot provider. And just to take a step back, looking at any feature, we always are going to follow this pattern. We'll have routes right in the root of it. But then we'll have components, models, providers, screens, and services. That's just a pattern I like. And it works very well for me. I've shipped many production apps with this pattern. So, if you're not sure on a pattern, not saying this is the best, but it is great and it works and won't stop you from doing anything. I guarantee it. So we have a scaffold and the app bar says, there's a title of our posts. Okay. Yeah. Pretty basic. If we go back here, posts, we also have a logout button, and this will actually just call the logout function of our auth provider, which just removes the tokens and also sets a new auth state. It basically clears the state, but says it's ready because we don't need to go back to that ready false. Because we don't want that loading screen to happen, basically. So it logs you out, and because you're logged out, watch, I'll click it. I'm automatically brought back to here because we have that redirect set up with the router, which is really cool. I'm gonna have to log back in again, and there we go. Okay, so what else? Where were we? Post list screen. So we have this stuff for logout, and that's, this isn't necessarily where you might have this hidden in a menu or a settings screen, but I just put it here just to have a place like to be able to make sure I could log out, which is important. Then we'll get back to the floating action button shortly, but let's look at actually just the read-only part of the data, actually seeing this list. So we have a post list component. So again, screen, and then we have in the body, it's really just this post list component. And this allows us to pass a family identifier in, which isn't going to be important now, so you can ignore it for now, but I do allow it because maybe we want to allow, maybe there's you looking at, a user's post list or your own post list or something like that. So public's just the default. And basically all this thing does is return something called list component, which is something that we have also made. And this is one of our core components. So I think that this is one of the first really cool uses of generics here. So I wanted to have, because I started to notice a pattern, I've noticed patterns in programming, where like I made the one for posts first, and then I made one for comments. And I was like, man, there's a lot of duplication in here. What can we do to make this better so that I don't have two files that are basically the exact same thing? So this is kind of how it works. We have the list component itself, and it's going to accept some different things we passed in. For instance, and let's just get both beside each other. It wants the state to be passed in, and state is going to be list state of type T. So another generic here. If you're not familiar with the generics, they're used a lot in Dart, or they should be used a lot because they're super helpful. It allows you to kind of reuse something where you have, this could be a post, it could be a comment, it could be a user, it could be, a user me in our case. It allows you to then reference it when you're the caller of it. And then this instance of it will know you're referring to a post, meaning it knows that list state, which also uses generics, which has an is loading, it has a nullable error, it has pagination info, and it has a list of T results. So we're passing through this generic all the way. So just by doing this, it's going to basically have a list state with type post as well, because we're saying like that. There's also a handle load more, a handle refresh, an item builder, and whether we want the list to shrink wrap, which is just a basic UI thing. And it allows you to pass true or false. In this case, I'm not passing it in, so it's going to be defaulting to false, but you'll see later we do pass it in for comments for a very good reason. And the way the list component works is this state here, list state itself, can have different cases with it. So in the build function, and this is where there was a lot of duplication happening. And I was like, how can I reuse this? How can we make this better? We might have, if the error is not null, but also the results are empty, because we could be, because this supports pagination. I don't want to just like, if an error happens, just completely eliminate the whole screen that you were looking at. I don't want to like show an error. It's only if the results are empty and there's an error. We're going to use that centered error component, which this is just a very basic thing. But the good thing is if we ever wanted to customize this and make it pretty, we only have to do it in one spot. But it's basically just a center with a text with the word error or whatever the error is passed in. Also, if the state is loading, and again, it's empty, we'll have that centered loader component. Again, if I'm just loading page 2, I don't want to replace everything with a loader until page 2 comes. I want you to be able to still see it. Otherwise, we go through and we return a list view.builder wrapped in a refresh indicator. And this is going to look at our results.length, and we're going to pass that shrink wrap value through, which was just being, passed in here as an option. And then what we basically do is we want to know, there's good reason for this. We want to know, is this the last one on the list? And we can get that by comparing the index to the results.length -1. If they are equal, we know we are last. So this is a Boolean. And then we actually get the item. And I'm using the word item because, again, this is generic. This could be a post. This could be a comment. This could be anything. And in here, we essentially run the item builder function within a column. And I'll show you why in a minute. Now, item builder is something else that gets passed in because this is generic. We can't just have like a generic thing being like, oh, just put, text with the post's name. We don't even know if this is a post. It could be used for anything. So we actually pass in the item builder by passing item back. And in this case, it's a post. And all because of the magic of generics, we can do this. And actually, so this is basically something for every single post. We're going to do a post list tile component, which we'll look at, but this is just a basic component. In fact, it's not even a consumer widget because it's so basic. Basically, you just pass a post in, and it's going to be a card with a list tile with the title of the post. The subtitle would be the owner's name, so whoever wrote the post, and then an on-tap event to bring us to that detail screen. Okay, cool. So that does that. Now, the reason we have this in a column is because if is last, and we can load more, because our pagination info actually, if we look at it, has a function on it called can load more, a getter, and basically it's going to look at whatever the count is, and if the count is greater than the current page times our limit, we know that there's another page. So that's just a nice little helper there that we can do. It's cool, and will let us do that. So if is last and state.pagination info can load more, essentially we're going to return this load more button component. Again, just a very basic button that says load more when there's more. And I guess in order to see that, we might have to mock something up real quick. What I will do is in my, let's take a look at the post list provider. Yeah, I'm just going to go to my post list service real quick. I'm going to make the default actually 1. And hopefully there's no other place overriding this. There is, I think. Yeah, there's something else overriding that. Let me figure it out real quick. All right, I was able to find the spot to override it. Basically just set it to be a default of 1 instead of 10. And you can see we have the load more button, and we can actually load more, load more, load more. And it doesn't, we don't have a load more button anymore because it's all gone. So let me put that back to 10 just for future needs. But yeah, it allows us to do stuff like that. And the load more button, all it does is when it's pressed, it runs this handle load more function that's basically passed in as well. Handle load more, handle refresh. Okay, so the only missing piece of this that I haven't shown is actually how the provider works. So let's open that up. So we have something called post list provider. This is not using a generator, and the reason is because, again, this I want this to be able to use generics and whatnot. So our post list provider actually extends base list provider. So let's take a look at that. And again, this is where I was seeing a lot of duplication because essentially anytime we load data, we want to start loading, we want to essentially get the data, and we want to do the whole fold on if there was an error and update the state. So I was able to actually figure out a way that we can put all that code in this generic called base list provider. And all you have to do is extend it, set its type of what type of thing it will be, and then override its request builder. So the request builder is actually where the specific work is done for a on a case-by-case basis. So for a comment or for a post or for whatever. And within here, essentially all we're doing is we're going and we're awaiting the post service .list. And we are essentially passing in a page because we can pass in the page here. We have to basically, match the shape of this, get the limit, all that kind of stuff. And it passes through. And then basically what this base list provider does when load is called, which happens by, oh yes, it happens in the build. So we do a future.delay just because this has to happen after the return, even if it's just probably 0 milliseconds, it would work, but whatever, 100. So when this is lazy loaded, it will call this function. And what we do is we update our state to say that there's no error and start loading. And all this really is, we have this simple state object, list state, which again is using generic, so I can't use freeze here, I can't use generation. But I have some helpers in here where we can just essentially these little helper factories that will, take our current list state and return it where everything's the same, but loading is true. And same with finish loading, everything's the same. It's just a bit quicker than doing, copy with all the time. Something for removing the error and something for removing the error and starting loading, because I noticed we're going to be doing that a lot. So just some helpers there. Although now that I move this to generic, those are probably not that necessary because this in theory is the only file that will ever be doing that. I might rethink that and just simplify it. But anyways, what we do is we get the result. And this is a list of either API error or a record. So this actually is multiple, things get returned, which is a new, fairly new Dart feature. But we'll have the pagination info. And we'll have a list of T, right? Not a list of anything, but a generic. And in this case, it's going to be a list of posts. And that means that this thing has to conform to actually returning, a list of posts. And so yeah, this generic's able just to call this and then do the fold. If there's an error, we basically say loading false and we set the error to detail because we might want to display that error to the user. And then otherwise, if it's a success, you'll see we're getting these two things back. So we have to deconstruct it. And this is how you deconstruct a record in Dart. We can just go brackets and then these two things. And you'll see this is of pagination info. This is of list again, T. And then, yeah, we just take our state. We want to check if we're on the first page, we just want to use the results. We want to replace everything with the results. But if we're on a higher page, we want to take whatever's in the results and actually spread it so we get these new results. And that's how you get that sort of, infinite scroll kind of pagination. Then we update the pagination info, and then we set loading to false. Then we have our refresh and our load next page. Load next page just checks if you can load more, and if so, it calls the load again with the page +1, and we'll go through that whole process again. All right, that's basically it on that front. So pretty cool. Meaning, so we have our post list provider, but we also have like our comment list provider, and you'll see that they are very similar, but way less code than if we were duplicating all this logic. So in here, instead of post, we do list, and then it's just the comment service instead of the post service, basically. So everything there is cool. Let me just save whatever I changed. I'm sure it was for a good reason. And let's get back to our routes, because we've gone, I think, in full on the list view. You've seen everything except for, the creating, which we'll get to after. Clicking this. So we have another namespace, which is which we pass the post.uuid over. So if we actually look at the post list tile component, we're actually just doing a context.push. And again, we're taking the post roots namespace. Good practice. If we want to change that to say blog, we do it in one spot instead of having to look for all of our code for the word post, which is going to come up a lot. And then the UUID. So you'll notice when I'm pushing, I'm not pushing it with even though I have access to the post here and could make my life a lot easier by passing the post through and then just having a post on the post detail screen instead of a string. I'm passing the UUID. And the only reason for that really is for deep linking, right? Especially for web. Someone might want to come to a post with a specific UUID already. And if we're relying on them on clicking on something to get there and the data already being in memory, this page will break. It wouldn't work. So this is just a very good pattern where we want to assume that any detail page for something needs to be retrievable on its own, just from a string or an int or whatever, some kind of, just very low level data that will make this work. So basically we have this gets pushed to the post detail screen over here. And again, I noticed a pattern too when I made this page and it just looked kind of ugly. So the post detail screen it's pretty cool. We're basically watching the post detail provider, and let's take a look at that. So this is a generated class, so it opens here. So this is a riverpod post detail. What this actually returns, although this is saying it's returning this, it's actually when this is true. We're returning a future of either API error or a post. And basically it is a family-based provider because we have the second argument here, which is the post UUID. And that's why if you see here, we're actually watching post detail provider with this UUID. It will go and it will retrieve it using the post service. And we've seen this already, it's more or less, it's just going and doing our get on post UUID, et cetera, and it's returning, right if everything went well, and we get the post back. So this is returning this. However, because we're using this generator, what actually is returned, if we look at this, is not that. It's an async value of either this right here. So it's not a future anymore. And the reason is because we can have multiple states of what's happening. Either like it could be loading, there could be an error, or maybe we got data successfully. So that's what we're handling here. What I've done, again, because this is a pattern that comes up a lot, and as we have more pages and more screens, I don't want to be duplicating the same annoying code all over. So I've created something called detail screen. This is another use of generics, right? So we actually are saying it's a detail screen of type post. And what we have to pass in is this data, which is an async value of T, you'll see T, but we've marked it as post. So we're passing a post one in. And we also have a callback essentially when we actually have data. So what this does And this will be nothing new to you if you're familiar with Riverpod, but I really like this pattern because this is super clean now, and I don't have this logic spread in my app a million times. Basically, we're watching that data. When it's loading, we're just going to return a little scaffold back with a app bar that's just empty and a circular progress indicator. If there's an error, we're going to return something I made called error screen, which is basically like, is a screen that has an error on it that you can pass in what the error says. Again, just try not to reuse things because we also have it here. There might be an error, even though like we have the data, FP Dart might have still had some other error that happened and it's marked it as error. So we fold on it, we get the error, we send their error screen back to them. Otherwise, we call this when data. And we're actually going to return when data. And what we're really passing through is this post detail screen. I've marked this with an underscore because you never want to call this externally. We always want to be talking to this one. But the actual logic of the post detail screen that now will have access to the post has our normal logic in it, right? Just a scaffold. We have a button to be able to edit it. And we have our post detail component, which actually has, the post's body, the owner name, the divider, and then the comment stuff. So there, that's it. A lot of stuff just to do something so basic, I know, but this is a nice way of doing things. It's a lot more safe. Your code will feel better. It'll be more resilient. All right. One of the last things I want to show is how we're dealing with editing content. So let's go back to our post list screen, and we have this simple thing where we are in the case we have this floating action button on the list screen, which will actually go and bring us here. So this just pushes us to our edit screen, which is just a route in our router, but we can look at it, post form screen. And this screen, I'll open up for later, but we also have this thing called post form provider that when we're doing new, we just clear it. When we want to make a new one, we clear it ahead of time. And let's take a look at this right here. And I'll get that ready for later. So this is a Riverpod class. It's called post form. It has a few things like a form key, a title controller, and a body controller that are all late attributes. And we initialize them right here. So init, cool, initialize, they get set right in this right here. Now, what is being held in this notifier is post form state, which has our is processing as well as a post itself. So that way eventually, like you could add other things to this. Like you might want to know if there's errors or who knows, but we break it up like this so that we have access to the post, but also like it is processing, et cetera, et cetera. And we have some initial state. So this just gets our initial state, post form state, and we have to pass in a post because it's a required field. So I actually have this helper on our post model, which I realize actually we haven't even looked at the models at all. We should probably look at a model. Let's do it. This is a good time to do it. So we're using freeze for models. So we have post. It is using a mix-in of this generated class called post. Freezed, if you're not familiar with it, this might look a little bit confusing, but it's way better than writing this all yourself. Essentially, we're configuring, what a post looks like. And this should look exactly, you should make this look identical to your serializer on the back end, right? We have an ID, we have a UUID, we have a title, which is a string, a body. We have a user, which is right here, but we're calling it owner because that's what our API calls it. Cool. And then we have also a status, post status. And what I've done here is I've created an enum called post status. And this matches our draft and published that is in our API. Now, keep in mind in our API, in our backend, we also have a removed status. However, that will never make its way through the API because our API is always filtering out removed ones. So we have this nice enum and some of the cool Dart 3 stuff where we can actually have properties on an enum. So I'm actually passing the name in so that we can access that in other places. And because this isn't just like a string or an integer or something that Freeze knows what to do with, we have to create a post status to JSON and from JSON. And the to JSON basically we'll be expecting at this point to be a post status, and we want to return the name because this is what it needs to be on the server. Similarly, when we're getting it from the server, we'll have name. And what I do is I look through all the post statuses and I find the first one or null where the name equals that name. And if that is null, I fall back to publish, just assuming, okay, I guess it's published. If for some reason something came back that wasn't. Hopefully doesn't happen. It shouldn't, but just want to keep it type safe. Then then we have the date time, and because we want to use created at in camel case, but the server on Python at least wants to use snake case, as this is called, we can actually override the name, and this is the name of what it will be on the server. So for from JSON and to JSON, that will automatically be handled. We have a factory, and this just comes with using our serializable packages and freeze annotation and all that sort of stuff to automatically deal with the from JSON and to JSON using the configuration. And I've created this empty class here, this factory. So this will return us an empty one, which is the reason we came here in the first place. That has an ID, it has a UUID, just all these things are blank basically. And same, we have a user.empty that follows the same pattern. We set a status to draft, and sure, created at can be now. That way we're not dealing with null, because I don't like, if ever possible, I'd rather not the form state be something that could be a nullable post, because then everywhere in here we'd have to be checking, is it null? Is it null? Is it null? So I'm just like, nope, it's not null. It's never null. So we also have a clear function that we can call, which is good to call at the end of creating a post, because you don't want that data to be there anymore. And in fact, we are already calling it over here. We're doing .clear, which just will clear the title controller and body controller and set the state to that initial state again. We have a way to load a post, which is good for editing. So we essentially update the state to whatever post got passed in, and then update those controllers to use those things. And then we have a method to update the status. We can pass in a status, and it will just do a state.copyWith post, state.post.copyWith status. So, something cool about using freeze is you get these copywith methods just magically, by using it instead of having to write our own, which is really handy for stuff like this. We've created some validators here, which are cool. So it allows us to keep kind of like our validation within the business logic side and keep our UI separate. So we have that for that. And then our submit. But let's actually look at the form itself. So we had the post form screen, which doesn't actually have too much on it. It's mostly, other than the stuff for the save button, which we'll look at shortly, it's mostly just a reference to this post form component. So this is going to have access to the post form provider here. That's this guy right here. And it's going to have the state of it by watching it. So we read its notifier, we watch its state. This is reference to the actual provider. This is a reference to the state itself. So we wrap everything in a form because we want to have our provider have its own, we want to have its form key referencing this form key here. So we can do provider.form key, cool. Which basically just allows us to do when we're actually submitting it to do form key.currentState.validate. Just a basic Flutter, stuff. I'm sure if you've done forms, you know how that works. It'll essentially run these validators that we've passed through on the various form fields, and we'll bypass. If it doesn't validate, it won't get to all this, and it will show those lovely little, red text. So for instance, if I try and save now, you actually get these sort of things here. Cool. And then we have a checkbox, and that's basically what is doing that provider to update status. If it's true, we want to set it to published. If it's false, we're setting it to draft, basically. And because this is watching that just by going state.post.status, if it equals published, we want it to be checked. If not, we don't. So very easy now to manage your state and keep everything in sync. When I change this, stuff's happening over here, and it's doing something, which that is bringing this back here. And then we have our submit function, which actually isn't even part of this component. You could, of course, decide to have a save button within the form, but I decided to put it up here, which isn't really part of the form. So that's why it's on the form screen, just as an action. So I actually am, similarly, I have the provider, that same pattern where I'm reading the notifier, but have the state watching it. And what we do is on pressed of this, we just submit it. And because the submit itself, which we'll look at in a minute, could return a string or a bool, we have to fold on that, FP Dart style. And we actually, if there was an error, we just use our toast service to show the error. Otherwise, if it gets into here, it could be successful. It could be a true. And in which case we will do, post.saved, content.pop, and that context.pop, that will just bring us back to the previous screen. Otherwise, we'll just say something went wrong, if there was a success, but something went wrong. And the reason that is there is maybe, although I don't think there's actually a case, we're just basically doing true, but maybe there's a reason that, we get the success part, but we return false here. Anyways, I'm handling it just in case, although there's no way it actually could happen in this current implementation. So how does the save work? Well, first of all, we need to, because we're not actually updating the state of our title and body when we are changing it, we want to, at the point after it's validated, we'll actually update our post with that title using the title controller text, the body controller text, that kind of thing. Then we just do our post service.save. And this is a pretty basic function. We're just passing in the post after it's been updated with these things. And here we check if it exists. And what does exist mean? Well, this is just a little helper here. Basically, if the ID is greater than 0, we know it exists, meaning like it's already one that's in the database. It's saved because an ID will start at 1. If it's 0, which is what we do in our empty, we know it doesn't exist yet. So if it exists, we actually run the update function. And the update, again, takes a post, and it actually hits the post endpoint /me/the UUID of the post. And then we just run a to.json on the post. And what's really cool that I didn't actually mention on something else with freeze is we can decide to override, by default, everything will be part of the include, part of the to.json, and everything will be part of the from.json. But we can actually turn it off for certain ones. So I actually don't want to send up an ID or a UUID or even the owner or even the created at. I don't want to be saving any of that to the server. The server handles that automatically. Really, I only want to send up title, body, and the status. So we can go include to.json false. And that way, when we run the to.json, it's only going to actually serialize those few parameters instead of everything. Now, our server, it would be fine. It's not going to just edit the ID. We've set those to read only. It can't be edited. It's fine. But this is just a cleaner way of doing it. Why are we setting that stuff up? It's confusing. Because in theory, we would be sending up, if it's an empty one, we'd be sending up an ID of 0 and a UUID of, empty if we didn't do that, which, again, doesn't really matter. But let's make this clean and nice. If it doesn't exist, which in our case, starting a new one would be the case, we do create. It's basically the same thing, except we're posting instead of patching. And we're posting to a slightly different endpoint because we don't know, there is no UUID yet. We're not updating something. We're like, give me a new one. And we do the same thing. So yeah, that's it. And basically, if it's a success, if it's not, we forward basically the error over so that we can do the stuff I was showing you here. But in the case that we get a post back, we update our state of the form just to be that post, because why not? Then we actually, this is cool, we invalidate the post list provider. And that's how, if I actually was to, take one of these, let's take publish test 1, edit it, make it say, new, just so we know it's something new. Not only does it change here, but you actually see this says new, because we're actually invalidating that. And invalidate is a nice way to basically refresh it, but you're not actually refreshing it at that moment. You're marking it as stale, and the next time that is watched by a screen or whatever, it's going to basically run it from scratch. So refreshing it. So then, and similarly, we want to, invalidate the detail provider because that's the one we were just on, and that, we want this to actually update its state for us. So there you have it. Okay, so that's basically it. Now, the only other thing I don't think I showed that's in our app, well, I didn't show any of the user stuff, but that's the same as posts. And in any way, it's a lot simpler because we're not editing users, we're not doing anything like that. I didn't really show you the login form, but it's a similar sort of pattern. When I'm logged out, for instance, we have a form, but it's following that exact same pattern as what I showed you in posts. So I don't think I have to go into that. The only other thing I guess is comments. And this was pretty basic once we had everything in place because we have all these generics at our disposal. Basically comment, we have so I guess starting with on the post detail screen, we actually, in the component itself, we have this comment list component. And this is just like that post list component, but with comments. And we just have a list of a comment list tile component, which just has the, title being the body of it and then the owner's name. And that's how you get this lovely, test 1, 2, 3. You see, there's our list tile, there's that. So, it doesn't look beautiful, but it's functional, it works. And then we have this other thing right underneath that called comment form component. And this is similar to that, except we only have a body, we only have one controller, but our comment form provider is a little bit different because it's a family, because we need to be able to pass in the post UUID. And the way we can do that is simply just adding in our build function a parameter here. This will allow us to, it'll actually generate a unique instance singleton of our comment form provider for every unique string passed in. Because, maybe in your app you have multiple, of course, there are multiple already, right? Each post has its own. We don't want them to be like interacting with each other, so they're their own, sort of like safe little sandbox. But other than that, not much is different. We do this, we submit it, and we show an error. And the submit, essentially does this comment create, which we have to pass the post UUID in because it has to know what post it is, because our create function is expecting that in our backend. If we looked at Postman, create comment, we want to pass in the post UUID and, the body. So we're just kind of doing that here. We're not using the to JSON because we don't need all that. All it really needs are these two things. So we keep it really simple. But it does all the same thing. Yeah, we do, we set it to stop processing, and then we either get an error and we want to invalidate, this list so that it reloads. So hey, 1, 2, 3. And you'll see this actually will go in now. Now that could be a little bit smoother. We could find a way to actually like get that comment and just append it instead of reloading the whole thing. But problem for another day. This is totally fine. All right, we've made it to an hour here. So this is it for me. Source code is for both projects is in the description. So feel free to check it out. And, in the future, there'll probably be a little more update on this project as I sort of get more of the pieces together for basically this Houston boilerplate I've been talking about with some really sweet code generation stuff. So thanks for watching if you made it this far, and in this video specifically or in the entire series, really appreciate it. And, throw some notes in the comments, questions you have, because I know there was a lot here and I'm happy to answer them. Also, if you have any suggestions, I'd rather, make some changes now. Then getting really far in this, if you're like, oh, I hate Go Router, like, tell me why, that kind of thing. Appreciate it. Thanks again, and have a great day.